All right, we are live.
All right. Good
Oh,
morning, world. All right. So I'm going
Professor,
to just.
Professor Lon took off for a second there.
Yeah, I made it after we went live. It's good.
All
Well,
right.
welcome everybody to our discussion on roles of women in the biblical narrative. Um, yeah, so we've been having a deep discussion. We came to Exodus because a couple of reasons. Like Susie pointed out that probably the earliest audience of Genesis were the people in Exodus, and so looking at those two stories together is probably really important. And then I had I've been our prayer meeting is reading through Exodus right now, and I started to notice as we were doing that the first four chapters of Exodus are just like slapping you in the face with women. It's just women, women, women saving the day, one after another. You know, so that sort of messes with all these assumptions that this is a book meant to create a patriarchal system. It seems like there's this subversive like lifting up of women and helping us understand that in the text, like it's out of it's like really um forceful. And
Yep.
so and it even gets really significant when you get into chapter 3, which is this whole interview with Moses. And then at the end, it says, and the women will go next door to the women and um, ask for gold and silver and clothing. And this was going to happen. We don't know it in Exodus 3, but we know it by the end of the story that conversation is going to be had after the death of the firstborn. And just even thinking through, and that's the last thing God says. That's the last thing God says. So it's almost like, God has an end game in mind, and the end game of them leaving Egypt is the conversation between these women and their Egyptian neighbors, women neighbors. And so if you weren't convinced that 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 Exodus is about women, um, this would probably do it, because it's the final word that God wants. It's the punctuation coming out of Egypt. And so what I wanted to sort of think through a little deeper what is going on here. Um, and there's a there's a podcast or a teaching, and you know I I I have no shame in saying the majority of my thoughts are not super original. I get a lot of them from that that guy right there. From this website called Aleph Beta, and I'm actually going to put this in the chat if you want to. This is like an hour and a half lecture that Rabbi Foreman from Aleph Beta does uh, on why did God want to kill Moses. And I'm not sure I totally agree with his conclusions, but along the way, he raises a lot of really good questions that I kind of want to take us through right now.
What was the question?
Why did so in chapter 4,
Uh huh.
we haven't read that yet, but in chapter
Hmm.
4, Moses is on his way to Egypt, and God comes to kill him, and
Oh.
Zipporah saves him. So maybe we can read that, but the answer to that, I think a lot of the answer to that is in chapter 3, and
Mm.
that's kind of how he takes the argument. So maybe let's look at that passage, but then go back to chapter 3, and at the same time we're going back to chapter 3. Let's also remember, like for our sake, um, because we're looking at the role of the women, um, that chapter 3 ends with this conversation between the Egyptian women and the Israelite women. both who probably have lost children because of a man named Pharaoh, right? And so, like there's something going on here about the role of women for sure. So so let's look at that. Let's look at Exodus 4.
Yeah,
And
and can I comment on someone put up there that God wants to bring us out of our Egypts, right?
Right.
And yeah, God wants to bring us out of our Egypts, whatever it may be. Yes. And I also think this is a call for us to see how are we building Egypts? Are we have we created Egypts where we're trying to control, place, minimize, and have everything go according to the way we want it. So just
no, I think that's absolutely what's going on. So
right. Right.
yeah. All right. So who can read Exodus? And let me make sure, like, I think it's all of Exodus 4, but I just want to double check that we're not reading more than what we need to. Oh yeah. So let's just start at okay. That's interesting. Yeah. Let's read all of Exodus 4. Actually, Exodus 4 is super important. Yeah.
Ready?
Let's read all of it.
All right.
Okay. So, but Moses protested again. I'm reading the New Living Translation. But Moses protested again. What if they don't believe me or listen to me? What if they say, the Lord never appeared to you? Then the Lord asked him, what's that in your hand? A shepherd's staff, Moses replied. Throw it down on the ground, the Lord told him. So Moses threw down the staff, and it turned into a snake. Moses jumped back. Then the Lord told him, reach out and grab its tail. So Moses reached out and grabbed it, and it turned back into a shepherd's staff in his hand. Perform this sign, the Lord told him. Then they will believe that the Lord, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, really has appeared to you. Then the Lord said to Moses, now put your hand inside your cloak. So Moses put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out again, his hand was white as snow with a severe skin disease. Now put your hand back into your cloak, the Lord said. So Moses put his hand back in, and when he took it out again, it was as healthy as the rest of his body. The Lord said to Moses, if they do not believe you and are not convinced that the first miraculous sign, they will be convinced by the second sign. And if they don't believe you or listen to you, even after those two signs, then take some water from the Nile River and pour it out on the dry ground. When you do, the water of the Nile will turn to blood on the ground. But Moses pleaded with the Lord, oh Lord, I'm not very good with words. I've never been, and I'm not now. Even though you have spoken to me, I get tongue-tied and my words get tangled. Then the Lord asked Moses, who makes a person's mouth? Who decides whether people speak or do not speak, hear or do not hear, see or do not see? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, and I will be with you as you speak, and I will instruct you in what to say. But Moses again pleaded, Lord, please send anyone else. Then the Lord became angry with Moses. All right, he said, what about your brother Aaron, the Levite? I know he speaks well. And look, he's on his way to meet you now. He'll be delighted to see you. Talk to him and put the words in his mouth. I'll be with both of you as you speak, and I will instruct you both in what you do. Aaron will be your spokesman to the people, will be your mouthpiece, and you will stand in the place of God for him, telling him what to say. and take your shepherd's staff with you and use it to perform the miraculous signs I have shown you. So Moses went back home to Jethro, his father-in-law. Okay, now it's called Jethro here. So we know it's the same person.
The Zipporah's daddy.
Yes. Please let me return to my relatives in Egypt. Moses said, I don't even know if they are still alive. Go in peace, Jethro replied. Before Moses left Midian, the Lord said to him, return to Egypt, for all those who wanted to kill you have died. So Moses took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and headed down back to the land of Egypt. In his hand, he carried the staff of God. And the Lord said to Moses, when you arrive back in Egypt, go to Pharaoh and perform all the miracles I've empowered you to do. But I will harden his heart, and he will refuse to let the people go. Then you will tell him, this is what the Lord says. Israel is my firstborn son. I commanded you, let my son go so he can worship me. But since you have refused, I will now kill your firstborn son. On the way to Egypt, at the place where Moses and his family had stopped for the night, the Lord confronted him. I was about to kill him. But Moses' wife, Zipporah, took a flint knife and circumcised her son. She touched his feet with a foreskin and said, now you are a bridegroom of blood to me. When she said a bridegroom of blood, she was referring to the circumcision. After that, the Lord left him alone. Now the Lord has said to Aaron, go out into the wilderness to meet Moses. So Aaron went out and met Moses at the mountain of God, and he embraced him. Moses then told Aaron everything the Lord had commanded him to say, and he told him about the miraculous signs the Lord had commanded him to perform. Then Moses and Aaron returned to Egypt and called the elders of Israel together. Aaron told them everything the Lord has told Moses, and Moses performed the miraculous signs as they watched. Then the people of Israel were convinced that the Lord had sent Moses to Aaron. When they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and he had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshipped.
Mm.
Ooh, good job.
Mm.
So, yeah, let's just kind of do the normal thing. Like,
Yeah.
what kind of bugs you about this story? What seems like you wouldn't the things that you wouldn't expect that are happening, and yeah, what are the things that bug you, like story wise, that are unexpected?
Well, can I share something that I thought was pretty cool?
Sure.
That as God is speaking to Moses, he's also speaking to Aaron at the same time.
Yeah, I noticed that too. That I just loved that. Really spoke to me personally. Like when God is telling you to do something that involves people, he can also simultaneously talk to the other people and bring both of you together.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Because that's happened so many times to me.
Yeah.
And it actually builds my confidence a little bit. It's like, oh, okay. I heard you, but now I'm like really leading in to hear you.
Yeah. The other thing I noticed there.
So I just want to clarify that. So is that inferred because he's saying Aaron's on his way to meet you? Is that?
Oh no, he actually says it that the Lord spoke to Aaron towards the end.
Yeah, verse 27.
Verse 27. To
Yeah.
go and meet Moses.
Yep.
He
Go to
was
the
talking
Logan.
to two people in different places about the same thing.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, the other thing I saw there, probably not related to what we're talking about, spoke to me was that when God told Moses to lay down his rod, it was called the rod of Moses. Like, lay down your rod. But when it was going, they called it the rod of God. You read it there. The rod of God. So it just spoke to me that, when we lay down, things that are ours, right? It could be things that we never really paid attention. That rod represented what Moses used in that wilderness for 40 years, to guard the sheep and all that.
Yeah.
It could be a business that you started. It could be a talent or something that you've been given. But when it's presented to God, it's just turns from just being yours,
Yes.
becomes God's, and then it carries God's authority and power. So that really spoke to me, that anything that would be, that was his business, what do you call it? Tool. It was a tool in his business of sheep rearing, right? That God said, I'm going to use to convince people. So we all can present whatever it is that God has given us, or where we have been, and all that, and can become God's, can be used by God. So,
and that makes me think, what haven't I laid down to God?
yeah.
Right? What am I still holding on to that I think I got to do this. I got to finish this. I got to do this. And it hasn't clicked that I need to lay it before God so it can become
God's.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, that process. For Easter, I preached on three snakes and 2 lambs. So I use this story of the snake here. And but just if you look at what happens there, he throws the staff down. What happens? It becomes a snake, and he runs from it. So to kind of pursue your theme there, Pastor Long, a lot of times when we lay something down to God, it becomes something different. And it's scary. And then God says, take it by the tail. He makes Moses confront his fear.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I do think, like, I'm kind of going through that with like something in my life right now with Night Church, where I really feel like God is kind of saying, lay it down. And so I'm trying to do that, and it is becoming something different. And so that's, that's somewhat startling, right? Because like I literally for a year had created a budget, all this kind of stuff, was trying to raise money. And then it's like right before the season starts, it's like becoming this new thing. And that's really I think that maybe even ties into our question, is that Moses has had this life for 40 years.
Yes.
And it's about to become different. And will he run from it, or will he grab hold of it?
Yeah. And that rod, was eventually what parted the Red Sea.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That, I mean, what we lay down, we never know the extent of how God can use it.
Yeah.
So it was not something you had been using for a long time. And God says, lay down. And like you said, God forced him to confront his fears. He saw himself where he was. And God now said, now take it back. And then when they were leaving, it said, and the rod of God was in his hand. I mean, that was shocking. It was stated there, and the rod of God was no longer his own, but it was in his hand.
Yeah.
Can you just imagine how Moses then looked at that rod afterwards? Like, right? Just every day that he had that rod. Not that he was worshiping the rod, but he was holding something that God can powerfully use.
Yes. Yeah. Someone is asking a question there. So how do you lay down gracefully so others can see what God is doing?
Yeah, that's a good question.
It's a good question, but it's also like, I think sometimes you have to do it just between you and God. Like there's that time of, and this is something like you kind of see with David. You see it a lot with those that God calls. The calling is a lot of times just between them and God, and there's a time of God proving to the leader that he is with him. Right? You think about Gideon, you think about David's killing. David gets anointed by Samuel, and he's not going to become king for 15 more years, right? But it says, and the Holy Spirit came upon him, and all of a sudden he's realizing this sling, man, I'm killing like bears with my bare hands. I'm like, he's got this strength and power in him that comes from God, so that by the time this, shepherd young man shows up and sees Goliath, he's ready. He's ready to take him. He's already confronted his fears before he steps into the public view of that gift that God has given him.
Yeah. The other thing I saw there. Oh, go ahead, please.
No, you go ahead. I can go after.
No, go ahead.
No, I want to hear what you have to say.
Okay, all right. I was going to say that the other thing I saw there was Aaron and Moses. This, we started when we were doing this podcast, before we started broadcasting, we were talking about firstborn, secondborn, like visionary and counterpart and all that. So I just saw that theme of like, even when God calls, gives an assignment or a role to someone, right? God, there are certain weaknesses that person may have that God raises a counterpart, which is very much in line with our role of women. Aaron was going to speak and Moses was going to do something else, but they were both going to be accomplishing God's purpose, fulfilling their unique role based on how God ordained it. And of course, Aaron eventually became the high priest and all that. So I just saw that counterpart, helper theme in there with Moses and Aaron.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder, because it doesn't really go into it, but I wonder what Aaron had to lay down. I wonder what he had to face to get to that place where he was walking in the wilderness, right? Yeah. And then I wanna unpack the laying down a little bit, because there have been times when I've had to lay things down and it was hard because I was really attached to it. I was attached to what the outcome would be. I was attached to the creation. I had all these attachments. And so I think laying something down is a process. It's not just a one-time thing like, okay, I'm going to lay down this project. I think it's how is this feeding my pride? How is this feeding my ego? Right? How is this feeding my how I want people to see me, my appearance or whatever. And so I think when we take closer looks at what am I attached to in what I'm laying down, right? And like you guys said, what fear do I have that's keeping me holding on to this? I think laying down is a process. It's a process. Like, okay, I see now that I'm attached to this in this way. And this is what it was feeding my ego. And God, I don't need to feed my ego like that. Right. So, yeah, I think it's a process.
Yeah. And just to follow up, one thing as we've been reading through Exodus that stood out to me was at the beginning of the plagues, it's Aaron who's doing everything. So it says Moses and Aaron brought together all the elders of the Israelites, and Aaron told them everything the Lord had said to Moses. He also performed the signs before the people, and they believed. So God showed Moses the sign, but when they went to talk to the Israelites, I am seeing that it's Aaron who performed the signs. All right. And then if you go to the first confrontation with Pharaoh, then the Lord, this is chapter 6. Then the Lord said to Moses, now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh because of the mighty hand. God also said to Moses, let me see there.
Sorry, I wanted to make sure that we didn't miss that. In 2020, the 30 of 4 says Moses performed the signs. So Aaron was speaking, but Moses was doing the signs.
So mine said,
okay. Yeah. That's what, because I was like, all right, I got to find this.
I want to. Yeah, I want to know.
All right.
Yeah. Mhm.
All right.
Well, mine says,
What version are you using?
I'm looking at the ESV, but I was looking at this other one. Then Moses and Aaron went and gathered. Aaron spoke all the words that the Lord had spoken to Moses and did the signs in the sight of the people. It's kind of ambiguous about who's doing the signs.
Mm.
The NLT
Actually,
category says Moses did it.
because if you look at it, it says Aaron spoke all the words that the Lord has spoken to Moses and did the signs in the sight
Oh,
of the
I
people.
see.
Okay.
So and the reason I think that's a possibility is when you get to chapter 7,
Oh.
right, verse 8, the Lord, the heading is Aaron's staff becomes a snake.
Mm.
The
Okay.
Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, perform a miracle, then say to Aaron, take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake.
Mm.
So that's that's another lesson there, you know.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. Now, check
Mhm.
this out. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is unyielding. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he goes out to the river, confront him on the bank of the Nile, and take in your hand the staff that was changed into a snake. So I guess that could
Mm.
be Moses a snake or Aaron's snake. Then say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to say to you, let my people go so that they may worship me in the wilderness.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Then,
I think
Wow.
even
and
if
then
it,
verse 19, the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron, take your staff
Mhm.
and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the streams and canals, over the ponds and all the reservoirs, and they will turn to blood. So what I noticed was Aaron is the one who stretches out his staff, I think, in the first 3 or 4 plagues.
Yeah.
And it is when the priest of Egypt finally break with Pharaoh that Moses starts to be the one who performs.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm saying that there's a big, lesson there also. I mean, I think there's a reason why it's like that. I think there's
Mhm.
something that we can get from that, that even like this counterparts and all that, that God can, like whatever is done with us, it can replicate it very easily with
Yeah.
other people. And I've seen that in real life. Like,
Mhm.
I'll give you an example. I used to be the resident pastor in City Light Church on the South Side, right?
Mhm.
I used to do certain things and God operating, but God raises up other people and
Mm.
see like similar things, going on, even when I am not there. And I think there's just something in there that God is not limited to us. Like God can replicate and multiply whatever it is that He's doing with us, with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think that that's why, like, I kind of go with this theory of firstborn and kind of counterpart,
Mhm.
right? As opposed to a gender. So I think so. Like there's been like some arguments made. Well, God made a woman second, right? And so women are second or whatever, inferior, whatever, right? And so I think there's a lot of like, whoa, like, did God make them second? What about chapter 1, right? But I think more of what Genesis 2 is getting at is this concept of discipleship, right? Of passing on not just the values, but like here with Aaron, we see the actual power, right? And so even with woman, Adam names her and all the animals. In chapter 4, woman is doing all the naming, right? Think about Saul and David. David shows up as a helper to Saul, right? And he has what Saul needs to win, right? But then eventually David takes over and Jonathan becomes his helper, right? Which is, I mean, Jonathan is just such a I mean, an example of servant leadership, of God comes first, not my own selfish ambition. I mean, he literally lays down his right to the throne.
Let me add one to
Well-
it. Jesus came, right? Firstborn. And when he was leaving, he said, greater works you will do because I go to my Father. And he gives us the same Holy Spirit, right? So that we can go and do it. So I think that thing is all over, that God can start with one, right? But that doesn't mean that it ends with one, but it can transfer the same thing so that the ones that were, helpers and all that can go on and even do better.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
So, all right. So, a couple things. One is, in my mind, whenever I read this story, I always imagine Aaron as older than Moses,
He
right?
is.
Because, right? Exactly. So Moses is not really the firstborn. Aaron is, right?
Oh,
And
no, the firstborn, in terms of what we mean by firstborn, is the one that God spoke to
yes,
originally, and
yes,
eventually was leading.
yeah. So I was gonna then direct that to those kinds of stories. So like Esau and Jacob, and right. And so I just wanted to clear that for people, that it's not necessarily that they're born first.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And then the second thing is I understand what that is, that we're calling it discipleship or mentoring or whatever, because I've had all my daughter-in-laws have spoken to me about, thank you for teaching so and so for to do this, because now they I see that they got that from you, or they got it from your husband, right? And those are not things that we taught them and said, you need to learn this because one day you're going to have a wife. And I mean, there were some things like that, but I think that when we are living authentically, and we are trying to do the right thing and be honorable and have integrity, that is something that other people see. I mean, we're not doing it to be seen, but that is something that is learned. That is something that people take and say, I want that, right? Because that is strength. That is love, or that is trying to be respectful to another, right? So yeah, just wanted to throw that in there.
That's
Yeah.
good.
And it sort of points to, like, if you are in the firstborn role, in a certain situation, like, that really should be a role that empowers the people God sends you to, right? Like, that's
Yeah.
kind of how you're doing it right. And it is interesting, like, that seems to be the pattern, right? Is that you are empowered then, and wow, this is really deep, because I think about Aaron, who is sent down. We were just reading in Exodus today and thinking once again about,
Yep, I
yeah,
agree.
yeah. I'm seeing that, Lynn.
Mhm.
Uh, Aaron's sent down the mountain to deal with the people while Moses is up on the mountain. But Aaron and the elders, they have a revelation because they saw God on the mountain before Moses walked into the cloud. So they knew better than the people knew. They had seen better than what the people,
Mhm.
because the people saw Moses walk into fire.
Yeah.
Aaron saw him walk into a cloud. So God is putting Aaron
Mhm.
in the role that Moses had been in. Like, it's like he gets to substitute for Moses,
Mm.
and he fails that test, right? He fails that test, right? But it was expected for him to step into it. And it's like God is preparing him in this story already to be that guy, right? To be that, to know that the power is his in some sense too, right? And to know his place. Like, And we say know our place. A lot of times our place is, it's greater than what we assume it is. Right. Right. And you see that Elijah, Elisha, you know, you just see it kind of on and on and on. So it's very interesting that that's built in to this story.
Well, and I think that because Moses was not brought up with his community, right? He was separate. Aaron had that inside with his Israelite people, right?
Yes.
And so, you know, God bringing them together to partner, there were things that Aaron could say that would be received better by the people, right? And so the whole Aaron speaking for Moses is much more profound than what we could ever really understand.
Yeah, I see the concept of like position in leadership. There is what is called position, and there is influence.
Yeah.
So you can have position, but not have influence. And so if you're a leader, you have position and you don't have influence. People only do things because they are forced to do it.
Yes.
But when you have influence, I may not have position, people do things because they want to do it. So Aaron had the influence because he's lived with the people, they knew him and all that. Moses had the position, the assignment. So they had both had to be combined together to get the job done.
Yeah. So, and I think because of that, Moses was actually learning from Aaron.
Yes.
Right? He was learning from his older brother.
Yeah.
All right.
And so God knew he needed that kind of strength.
Yeah.
Right? And which says a lot about Aaron, because God, you know, God chose Aaron. So that means Aaron must have been very strong, right?
Yeah.
With
he became the high priest eventually, the first one.
Yes.
And all his children became, you know, the first set of high priests, the Levitical, you know, priesthood and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so just imagine, I mean, I'm just imagining as God is telling Aaron, now you go and you do all this with Moses, you know, you know, what there were so many things that were probably going on in Aaron's mind. And one is, well, Moses just murdered somebody. Well, not just murdered, but he murdered somebody. And what are you talking about? It's better if he stays over there. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah. So this was something that Foreman in that series brought up that I think is really worth looking at. If you go back to what bugs us about this conversation between Moses and God, is there anything that bothers you about this conversation
with Moses and God? All right. So before we get to what bothers me, something that I was thinking is that as God is speaking to Moses, is it audible, right? Is Moses actually hearing it? And is it visual? Like, was Moses able to envision what God was saying? You know, saying you're going to do this and you're going to do this and you're going to do this. And, you know, did Moses have the capacity to actually see it in his mind?
Yeah, I think, you know, from the narrative that, you know, he saw the burning bush, and of course, you know, that there was a representation of God then called the angel of the Lord that they used to see in the Old Testament, called the angel of the Lord that will speak, you know, that will speak to people as a representative. They actually saw that angel. So he said he saw the angel speaking to him through the fire. Right. But that angel was God, you know, like an extension of God speaking in those days. He was,
So and did Moses hear it? Like, yes. Right. Yeah. And what does that sound like when an angel speaks to you? Right. Because I know angels are still
a life-changing experience. And there's another lesson there, because that place where where Moses had this encounter, was a place he had gone through 40 years, back and forth, right? You know, taking the ship, and then on a particular day, something just caught his attention. Why is there bush burning? You know, and why is this happening? And then he turned around to see, right? It just tells us that even in our routines, you know, like what we've been doing, you know, I'd written something about that before, about curiosity. What you've been doing, you are so used to doing it, a neighborhood or something. In that thing, something on a day, God can use that routine to start a whole new season of your life. The next 40 years of Moses started from there. You know, someone actually said it this way, that Moses spent the first 40 years of his life thinking he was somebody. You know, the next 40 years thinking he was a nobody from his conversation with God. And then the last 40 years learning what God can do with a nobody. So that was the beginning of something for Moses. And again, that was the place he brought Israel to, Sinai. Where all the laws, all those things were done. That same place that he had to go bring them and take them back there. It tells us that even our experiences, Moses, there were two experiences of Moses that God used. First of all, is being in Pharaoh's palace, in 40 years. And secondly, is familiarity with the wilderness. God combined those things and turned it into an assignment to take Israel through the same, to speak to Pharaoh and take Israel. It just tells us that our experiences, our journeys matter, that God can use our journeys, that, you know, for a long time we've been doing it, and God can use those things to actually accomplish his greater purposes.
I love that. That. Okay, so does that mean that Moses and Zipporah's son was actually an adult when Zipporah circumcised him?
Probably, right?
Sorry.
Because if they've been married for 40 years, I mean,
right?
You know.
Okay. I just had to process that.
They've been married for 40 years. I mean, somewhere along the line, maybe they were 20.
There's definitely some cultural differences.
But you know, Abraham had to circumcise adults.
Yeah.
When God gave him that covenant, you know, circumcision, he had to do it for himself. And then do it for all the other adults in his household.
Okay.
Talk about.
All right. What don't we like? What don't we
talk about not being a OSHA employer. You did what to your employees? We are sending you to jail. We are sending you to jail right now. Okay. Well, I hadn't noticed. That's starting to bug me now that adult men were circumcised by their mom. I'm adding that to the list of things that bug me about this passage. That one I'm going to remember. Okay. So, talk about a woman like getting rid of what doesn't belong and only keeping what is supposed to stay there.
With improvised tools too.
No, really, we got to do this, or your dad is dead. Hand me that rock.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, thanks for that picture,
it tells you something about the character of Zipporah. Like she, you know, to do that.
No, it tells you about the character of her sons. That's what it tells you.
The fact that he trusted her.
Right? Definitely those sons these days. You know, they say, "Mom, what's up?"
Mom's taking this to a whole nother level for me.
Like I cannot see my sons letting him do that.
Yeah, do not try this at home.
Nope.
We live in a different dispensation. It's not biblical nowadays. All right. Okay.
Okay.
So other than that part
Yeah.
bothering me, I think I think for me, like one thing that he pointed out, and I think this always bugged me, it was like, why is Moses arguing with God? I mean, I'm sorry, like when God talks to me,
Oh.
it's like a still small voice, and I'm not totally sure it's always him, right? And I'm doing my best to be obedient. But for goodness sake, if God has showed up in a burning bush as an angel speaking to me, why is Moses sitting there having an argument about going? Especially, right? So this is like kind of, for me, this is like the question of that passage, right? Like, why are you arguing with God? I mean, he argues 3 times. It's like, I don't speak well, right? And God's like, who made your mouth? He's like, okay, that's a good argument. And then he literally says, could you please send somebody else? Right?
Yeah, it tells you the state that Moses was. Remember that Moses wasn't like that when he was in Egypt. He was someone that stepped out, killed somebody, fought, spoke, very vocal.
Yeah.
He was the one that fought against the men trying to take over the well and all that. But I think 40 years.
Yeah, he's a
40
man.
Yes, yeah. I brought him to that point. All right. Self-doubt and everything.
I can tell you exactly what that looks like because I argue with God all the time. All right. And I'm gonna give one example. When I first moved into the house that I live in now, right? Which is, the story, Scott, right? I was mowing the lawn. I was on a riding lawnmower, right? And this is like one of the first times I'm on a riding lawnmower, a city girl, on a riding lawnmower. And it wasn't my first time mowing the lawn, but I was enjoying it. And I had this strong sense that I needed to get off the lawnmower, walk down the road to a house at the end of the road and knock on their door. And I was like, nope, absolutely not. I've lived here for 3.5 months. Those people, every time I wave at them, they always look away. Nobody has welcomed us here. And I thought, nope, absolutely not. And so I just kept mowing the lawn, and that feeling kept growing and growing and growing until the point I was like, oh, I got to do this. So I turned off the lawnmower and I'm stomping down the road, and because I'm thinking, all right, I just got to get this over with. I knock on the door, and a 16-year-old girl, now I know she was 16. She answers the door, and when she answered the door, I had no idea what I was going to say. And as soon as that door opened and I said, hi, I'm Susie. I moved up the road. And it just came out. I said, do you have a youth group at your church? And she said, and I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, I don't even know if this girl goes to church. And she said, yeah, I do actually. I said, okay, well, when do you guys meet? And can anybody go to your youth group? Because I've got 2 sons. And she says, well, actually, the youth group is going to start meeting here on Thursday because the church is under construction. They're redoing things. So the pastor's going to come here, be with the kids and all that. And I was like, okay, great. So can anybody come? She said, well, here's my number. Give me your number. My mom will call you. Anyway, long story short, that ended up being the church that I worked at, that Scott's parents attend, that Scott grew up in. Wow. And I became the youth worker there. Right. I did not want to get off that lawnmower. I did not want to walk down to a house that was not friendly to me. Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I argued the whole time. So I know exactly what that's like.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thanks, Lynn, for counting for us. I appreciate that. Right.
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
Right.
I
Right.
wonder
So
how many times I declined that day too.
yeah. Yeah. And just Susie, for context, right? Your husband is black, right? Your
Yes.
kids are mixed, and this
Yep.
is West Michigan, which is pretty much all white, right?
Yeah.
And so they're not waving at her, right? And
Mhm.
Mhm. And all summer, I had my family here. So all like my nephews, my nieces, and we're all different skin tones, right? Because we're Puerto Rican. We're like all different skin tones. And that was scary for this area.
right,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
And so it's very similar. God telling you go knock on a door to what
Mhm.
God is telling Moses,
Right.
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So, but what is it that changes Moses's mind? All right, so it's he's talking to God. So God has just done all these signs and wonders too. I mean, it's like how in the world do you argue with God? Like you just like threw a snake on the ground. You threw a rod on the ground, it became a snake. You put your hand in, turned leprous. You put it back in, it was fixed. And then God's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And you're like, I think you should probably find somebody else. Right. Right. Right.
Mhm.
And look, Lynn pointed it out. So 5 times he refuses.
Mhm.
And then it says, then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. And he said, I'm going to torch you, Moses. I'm going to
Mm.
punch you in the mouth, Moses, because I'm so mad at you. No, what does he say? Is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite?
Mhm.
Mhm.
And first of all, why does
Yeah.
God have to say the Levite? Why put that in there? Obviously, he's a Levite. That'd be like saying,
Because
there's your brother Josh, who's a Parker. Be like, yeah, I know he's a Parker, right?
mhm.
So
'Cause-
what is going on here? What is it about? And then Moses is like, I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and take him your hand and this staff with which you shall do the signs. Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, please let me go back to my brothers in Egypt to see whether they are still alive. Which is kind of like, all right, God said it, but I need to see it for myself.
Mm.
But that was what changed him. Not a staff becoming a snake, not the blood, water turning into blood, not the miracle of that, not the I made your mouth. Aaron, your brother, the Levite, is coming to meet you. What is going on there?
Mhm.
I mean, I would say there's a boldness that comes from partnership, from having a God appointed, counterpart to do the things that is telling us to do. So maybe when Moses heard it, that wow, there's going to be Aaron, probably knowing Aaron's character, remembering Aaron, it's like, okay, maybe this thing is doable now. You understand that, that this person is going to be a counterpart or a partner there. So that's a possibility.
Hmm.
It could also be that, there's a way that convincing goes through processes, right?
Mhm.
God, first of all, allayed his first fear. Oh, the people who are seeking to kill you, they are gone. but he wasn't at that point of persuasion. And then God threw this thing down. God's addressing his question, still not at that point. And it would be that Aaron was the capstone, not necessarily the only reason. It's possible that it was, because for me personally, I have had situations where it was like a series of things that happened that eventually got me to do certain things. Like the starting of the City Light Church was a series of events. Someone came to me when I was coming from Nigeria and prophesied that when you get to the United States, you will start a church. By that time, I was working with a ministry to help extend it. And then was doing that for 3 years. And then another person that did not know me, and then different events started happening until one day somebody was preaching in church, was speaking in church, and he said, is there anybody here that God is telling you to do something and you are scared of and you've been disobedient, like you've not done it? That day, I told the person beside me, I said, I'm going out and I'm going to do this. So I stepped out and they prayed for me. And it was shortly after that we went to start City Light. It wasn't one thing, right? It was a series of things, but that one thing was the one that precipitated the whole thing, the one that the tipping point.
Yes, yeah,
was the tipping point. So that's a possibility too.
Yeah. I wonder too. That's good. I wonder too if Moses needed to go through that process in his head. I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. And maybe it was a tool that God used then to show, yeah, you're right, you can't do this. But I'm telling you, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to strengthen you. I'm going to, whatever. And so maybe it ended up being a tool for Moses to see later on, like when God said, do this, maybe Moses didn't hesitate as much as he did here, because there were things that happened to show that God is going to come through.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
So I've got a different theory I want to throw out.
Yeah, throw it out there.
No big surprise probably. But what if this isn't because Moses is afraid to go?
Okay.
So what if this is like the for real job interview? And what God is looking for, because what's interesting to me is God is angry. Like his anger burns, but he says nothing threatening at all. And so it's almost like the author is saying, like, God was so frustrated. Moses had got God angry, right? What if you think about it more like it's a negotiation?
All right, tell me more. I'm listening.
Well, what do we know about Moses? His role, his eventual role, is not to be the priest. It's to be the intercessor. Like, this is the guy that's going to tell God, hey, that's not such a good idea. Do you remember you brought these people out of Egypt? The whole world is watching. And if you torch them and start over with me, all the other nations are going to say that God didn't really want to deliver his people. He just wanted to destroy them.
It was learning how to argue with God, how to present his case.
That's what I think is going on here.
I mean, there's a way
I don't think Moses had a problem talking. This dude was a prince of Egypt. I think this is some haggling. I don't speak so well, right? Like, it's like, I don't know that I talk so well, right? And God's like, I need your mouth. And finally, he's like, I think you should get somebody else. I almost think Moses he wants something from God. And I think he what I'm thinking is that Moses knows I can't be the guy that leads these people because I lived in the big house, basically. I am not the guy to do this. That is not fair to these people that they've been sitting in slavery under oppression. And I even if you allow me to go in there, even if I've got all the power and I come in, there has to be some incarnate indigenous leadership's voice in this situation, right? And that is necessary. There needs to be a mediator between me and my power that you gave me and the people, right? Like I think he's wrestling for that with God, and I think that's why God is mad. Like what is up with this guy? Is standing up to me. He's mad, but I think he's also smiling inside.
Yeah.
I think he's saying this is what co-rulership looks like. This is what I always wanted from mankind, was somebody would stand. And what does God say when Aaron and Miriam come up with an excuse like, oh, he married a black woman? We're just as God speaks to us too. God says, no, I don't speak to you like I speak to Moses. Moses goes toe to toe with me. He's not afraid of me. When you all sit back, he went up the mountain. That's Moses's place in this whole thing. The Bible says he's more humble than any other man. And so I think what I would argue is that he was actually paying very good attention to what God was saying. And what was the last thing God said? Egyptian women are going to have a meeting with Hebrew women, right? And what that signals to me is God wants a reparation conversation as the women are leaving Egypt. It says to me that Moses is cluing into, why are you talking to me? Well, the only thing that's different about me than any other person is I was Egyptian, right? And so this is the other thing that has to bug you. Why doesn't God just get somebody else? Right? Like how long do you deal with somebody who's saying, I don't want to do it? Like God is not a respecter of persons. He can choose anybody and make them, right? And he actually does. He shows us, like, I can give Aaron the signs and wonders. I can give Aaron the words to say. So why is Moses even necessary?
Yeah,
Right?
so looking at it, I've even a pattern in several instances that God calls people in the Bible, even up to the point of Jesus. I think God is pleased when we are at a point where we don't feel like we got it all together. Because like Paul said, my strength is made perfect in your weakness. Grace is attracted to weakness, not to strength. So I see it in Gideon too, when he was called. I'm the least of the tribe. I'm the least of this. I'm this and that. And God said, go in your strength. What about Jesus? Lord, if it's in Gethsemane, take this cup from me. But nevertheless, your will be done. I think it's a better place, even though we can cross, like we could cross to a point where we get God, angry. But I think it's a good place and a safe place to be when an assignment is in front of us, or God is speaking to us about something, and we look at ourselves and we look at all the factors, just like what you're saying, and we're saying, Lord, I'm not the one. I'm not the man for this job. I think it's even a place that is good to stay in. That's the meekness, the meekness of Moses. Meekness is strength under control, right? That's a place to stay in, which is what Saul lost, eventually, right? So I'm just thinking that's a good place. That's a place where our sufficiency is of him, So I think that there's just something to say to that even you can get to a point of annoyance, like, why, And I think arguing with God is not something bad. I mean, Moses, Abraham did Sodom and Gomorrah, right? There's a
Right.
kind of prayer where God says, bring forth your strong reasons, bring
Right.
it to me. I
Right.
think when we begin to move into partnership with God, like working in partnership with God, we will
Right.
get to a point where God wants to hear what we think about stuff.
Right.
So, so I mean that's a reality. You understand? God, why do we want to do it this way? Why not use this person? Why do you want to do that? And God will respond and respond and respond. But there's a line you cross into where it gets. I think God loves that. He loves partnership.
Yeah. 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 And I can't remember which one of you said it, but that maybe Moses didn't have a problem speaking. I think, like, for me, sometimes in my past, especially when something would happen and I would have to go speak to someone, I felt like I couldn't go speak to them because I was too angry. Like, if I were to speak to them, it would just come out like vomit, right? And so maybe there's something there with Moses too, where it wasn't like he was meek. Maybe there was a lot of strength there, but not the kind of strength needed to be able to dialogue with the Pharaoh. And maybe Aaron had that, right? And so I don't know. I mean, we don't know, but I know that for me personally, sometimes when someone else says something in situations, sometimes they say it more impactful, more eloquently, right? And I think maybe there was that partnership that also strengthened Aaron, because maybe as he's listening to Moses speak, that is also strengthening Aaron, right?
Right.
Yeah.
There's another example in Jeremiah's case too, where it was about speaking to, that God was telling him to do something. And for his own reason he was young, right? That God had to tell him, go speak to these people, right? Don't say you are young. Don't look, just go, right? And of course, Timothy too, right? Paul was telling him that he should be an example of a believer. He should not let anybody look down on him. So there are various reasons.
Yeah. And just kind of pursue kind of my line of thinking a little further. Moses' first question is, how will the Israelites believe me? Right. Well, think about his past. Moses went to help the Israelites and they turned him in. So I think that might be a little bit of part of it too.
Wow, that's good. That could be.
Right. I wonder, like, God, like, maybe he's like, they deserve what they get. Right. Like I try to help those people and then leadership. And now you want me to go back and lead the people that didn't want to follow me, like turned me in. So I had to flee and be out there in the wilderness. He'd been thinking about that moment for 40 years because every day he goes out to the sheep, he remembers why he's there.
That's like Jonah's case too.
That's good. I'm thinking of times when I didn't want to go back somewhere and say something, but
and God says, grab the snake, Moses.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
You got snaked, right? You need to grab it, right? Well, I think it could be kind of like a little bit of both, because, and that's why also, who's he going back to? His Egyptian brother, most likely. And so God says, Aaron the Levite, your, like, if he would have just said your brother, Aaron the Levite, he's there. And I think that overcomes both things. Maybe Moses has thought through all this and realized, I was such an idiot thinking they would listen to an Egyptian. Of course they hated me. I was an Egyptian. I'm dressed like an Egyptian. I walk like an Egyptian. I talk like an Egyptian. And I'm telling them,
have the Egyptian accent.
Yeah. Stop fighting, guys. Stop fighting. And they're like, what the heck, man? I can relate to this. All right. And so, like, in my community, right? And so like, who are you to tell us? You didn't grow up here, right? Like, you know,
You preach it to me, you preach.
like, like, you know what's going on around here. You have no clue about what's going on. Where'd you grow up, right? Like, it's that kind of thing. So I think,
Walk like an Egyptian. Yep. I was thinking the same thing.
I think he really had a long time to think about the problems with him as an Egyptian trying to rescue people that he hadn't had their experience. But I also kind of wonder, and so Aaron solves all those problems, right?
Yeah.
Aaron solves all those problems. Aaron says, it's someone that you love to go back for, right? So it's not the people that snaked you, it's your brother. And he wants to see you, right? And that seems like God is speaking to Moses's sense of being rejected by his people.
Yeah, that's a strong possibility.
Yeah.
And so Aaron solves all of it, right? Which brings up like the whole thing, like we've been talking about from the very jump, this complementary way God always does things. He always has enough missing from you that it needs to be filled in by other people.
Yeah.
Right.
Like that.
Always, whatever situation, there is nobody who's independent. Everybody's interdependent.
Yes.
And Moses has the guts to recognize it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's almost like, I think that's what makes him the man that he is he understands that he's not enough and that he needs more. And that actually is what I think gets him to pass the job interview, even though he kind of frustrates God in doing it.
That's good, Scott.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a big lesson there too, that even if you in the process to God, I don't think it's the process of getting there that matters. So sometimes we worry the process. The fact is that he did it eventually. Right. It was just like Jonah too. He went through a process, went through the fish and everything. But when he came back, God said, go back to what I told you to do.
Yes.
So sometimes our processes are not perfect. But when we come out on the side of obedience, then it pleases God.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. This was good. This spoke to me.
Yes, me too.
Woo! Okay.
All right. Well, see you guys next week. We'll get into Zipporah and grown men being circumcised by another. This informs that, I think, a little bit. We'll jump into that next week.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Until next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.